Hello and welcome to Tech Deals, part 3 of the $2,000 Cadillac Build featuring the i7-8700K 6-core 12-thread Coffee Lake CPU. Linked in the video description below is the entire full playlist, the first parts overview, all of the Y vlogs. The full build video will be coming up with the camera overhead and all the details, benchmarking, and yes, I will show you a detailed overclocking video on this system. Also linked in the description below will be all the parts used in this system to both Amazon and Newegg, as well as additional parts that I talk about in this video: solid-state drives, hard drives, and system memory. This is part 2 of the Y vlog. The first one was in part 2 of the overall video series. Yes, I realized I should have probably labeled that part A and part B, but whatever. So that was CPU, motherboard, and cooler. This is storage and RAM. And then part 3 of the Y vlog is going to be case, power supply, and most importantly, graphics card choice. This video is where I do a deep dive of all the different RAM choices, the benefit of faster speed, the importance of CAS, which is different than speed, how much RAM you might need, whether or not RGB makes a difference. Okay, that's aesthetic. And then we'll talk about storage in a few minutes. Before we get started today with part 2 of the Y vlog, I want to address several viewer comments in the comment section of part 1 of the Y vlog. The first question that I was asked is, what about the i5-8400, which is the locked i5 6-core 6-thread CPU? I didn't even discuss it because, quite frankly, if you're watching this build video series, that shouldn't even be on your radar. That is a 4 GHz max turbo, 3.8 on all 6 cores, locked CPU. It's supposed to retail for about $170 to $180, although at the moment it's currently going for more. If you are looking at a CPU like that, a $2,000 build is not remotely what you should be looking at. Now, I realize I discussed Ryzen 5 1600 previously, but that's because it's 6 cores, 12 threads, and it's the competition from AMD to Intel, which is why it got discussed. Even the i5-8600, as I mentioned, doesn't really have a place in a $2,000 build. If you're building something this nice with a 1080 Ti and NVMe solid-state drives and basically a premium system, it's i7-8700K or bust. But as for the 8400, I will cover that probably next year in more detail when the H and the B series boards from Intel come out, because those will cost less. But for now, honestly, if you're looking at a $1,000 system, I would buy a Ryzen 5 1600. I think those 12 threads are going to make the CPU last longer than the 6-core 6 threads of the Intel chip. The next question I was asked was regarding the liquid coolers. I mentioned if you want an absolutely silent system, but you want the best cooling possible, buy yourself a 280mm cooler and just put the Be Quiet fans on it. The Nocturas are also very quiet as well, by the way. Somebody said, why don't you just buy Be Quiet's liquid cooler? It isn't sold in the United States. I'm aware they have a model. It's probably only sold in Europe. I've actually never seen one. It's definitely not sold in the US, which is why I didn't cover it. If wherever you live they sell those, then you might want to consider picking one of those up. Having said that, I don't want to overstate it. Several people said, really? You think you need to replace the fans on those? You don't have to. The streaming PC that I use downstairs has a Corsair H90 140mm cooler. It's in a Corsair case with Corsair fans. I live stream on that computer. I mean, I speak on the microphone to it live to my Twitch audience. I didn't replace the fans on that. I'm just very sensitive to noise, and since I have the Be Quiet fans, I went ahead and replaced them. I'm not remotely suggesting you have to. I'm simply mentioning that they are in fact quieter. The other thing I want to mention is this. This was just recently released by Cooler Master. Yes, RGB liquid coolers, yay! This is the Master Liquid 240 Lite 240mm RGB cooling system. This retails for $70. Yes, this is a 240mm liquid cooler for $70. That is an incredibly cheap price. It has been going in and out of stock on both Amazon and Newegg lately. I have not yet done a video on it because I'm waiting for stock to stabilize, because if you can't buy one, it doesn't matter. It's only $10 more expensive than the non-RGB light cooler. If you want Christmas on your desktop, that is an incredible value for the money. Just look up what 120mm RGB fans cost, and you'll see how cheap that really is. For the record, this will show up in a build video probably in January, so you will get to see that installed at some point. Lastly, I have one correction issue regarding the motherboards that I discussed yesterday. The MSI Z370 Tomahawk does in fact appear to have the same VRMs as the Crate Gaming. Now, I found pictures of the Tomahawk in 2 different configurations. So I'm actually not 100% sure yet. I have reached out to MSI to ask them as to which one it's actually coming with. I found pictures with the smaller VRMs, and then I found a picture on Amazon with the larger ones. So please note that when I talk about these things, I in fact don't have every single model of motherboard. I'm going based upon the pictures online and I'm looking at them. If you look at the Tomahawk and it's got 6 down the side and 4 up the top, you're good to go. Then that's going to be good for 5 gigahertz. If on the other hand, it has 4 down the side and 3 up at the top, I wouldn't run it at 5 gigahertz. Now the Crate Gaming does have the 6 and the 4 configuration, and it does run at 5 gigahertz just fine. Now if you watch the giveaway machine build video with the Corsair H90 140mm liquid cooler, yes, it does overclock to 5 gigahertz, by the way, but it's real hot and real loud. It's not recommended. That's a 4.7, 4.8 gigahertz configuration because it's a 140 cooler. If you want to run this at 5 gigahertz, you need at least a 240, preferably a 280 cooler. And with that out of the way, we're getting to the system RAM portion of this vlog. As you can see here, I have 1 or 2 kits of RAM. These are all 16 gigabyte kits, and in fact you can see I've got more here. The 2 large boxes on the bottom were the 32 gig kits which went into my Skylake X system, which is currently running underneath my desk. There are a lot of different RAM choices, so I'm going to break this down into several categories: brand, size, clock speed, cache latency, and then ultimately features like RGB and whatnot. RAM strikes me as one of those topics that people who don't follow computers on a regular basis could easily be confused about. Now, if you watch my channel all the time and you follow 5 or 10 different tech channels, this may all be a little bit redundant for you. But if you don't normally watch a lot of RAM videos and watch a lot of build videos, you may look at all this and go, what are you supposed to buy? This is confusing. Let me try and simplify it for you. The first thing to talk about is quantity. How much RAM do you need? Now, you're watching a video about a $2,000 system build. At the absolute least, 16 gigabytes of RAM is the minimum that should be in this system. I honestly hope that goes without saying, but I'm sure there's somebody who might think, oh, 8 gigs is fine. No, it's not for this system. It might be for smaller budget builds, but not for this. 32 gigabytes is not unreasonable for a system of this level, but it's not required. So everybody needs at least 16 gigs for this system. There's no sense in anything else. But do you need more? Do you need 32? Or what about the halfway size of 24? Now, I'm building it at the $2,000 price point with 16 because if you are just gaming, if you just want to play all current games, maybe even record the games while you're playing locally to your hard drive, 16 gigabytes is enough for everything available on the market today. This assumes that you are not multitasking while you're gaming, like trying to run 10 programs in the background or do other things. If you're just gaming, 16 gigs is really all that you need today. However, if you want to live stream those games, if you are going to go stream on Twitch or YouTube, and you want to be able to play all the latest and greatest games, you will need more than 16 gigs. It is no longer enough. I easily see my streaming machine at 16 gigs or more RAM usage. The new Star Wars Battlefront 2, Ghost Recon Wildlands, and other games easily push it up to 16 gigs. If you only have 16 gigs, there's no cache, there's no buffer, there's nothing for Windows to use for background tasks. You really do need more. Now, you probably don't need 32. You could probably squeeze by with 24. But I'm of the opinion that if you're serious about streaming that sort of thing, if you're serious about streaming and recording, and of course you're going to have OBS open and you're going to have other tools and tasks in your web browser open, you may be running multiple monitors, 24 gigs could work. Just go for 32. Yes, I know RAM prices. I'm filming this in December of 2017. DDR4 RAM prices have continued to rise. Currently, 16 gigs is going to run you about $150 for the slow stuff and up to $200 for the really good fast stuff. Yes, going to 32 gigs of that doubles those prices. I know it's a lot of money, but on the other hand, if you're serious about streaming, say, Battlefront 2, Ghost Recon Wildlands, Battlefield 1, for example, then you're going to want 32 gigs of RAM. The other reason you'll want 32 gigs of RAM is if you're doing a serious professional level content creation machine and you've decided to go with Intel, perhaps for its single core clock speed. Perhaps somebody made the comment regarding content creation in my previous vlog that video editing needs lots of cores, but certain things such as InDesign and Photoshop often run single thread, and what they need is extremely good single core performance. In those cases, the Intel 8700K makes actually quite a bit more sense than Ryzen due to its single core performance. But if you're loading up serious complex images in InDesign and Photoshop, if you get paid to use your computer, very quickly those type of tasks will require 32 gigs of RAM. I mentioned that these two boxes down here had 64 gigs of RAM, and my Skylake X has 64 gigs of RAM because I do 4K 60 frame per second video editing, and I often have Photoshop open, Media Encoder open, I've got online backups running, web browsers. I often go over 32 gigs of actual program use, not to mention cache and buffer and inactive background tasks in Windows. My previous Ryzen 7 system had 32 gigs of RAM, and I was often maxing it out to 90 to 95% system RAM usage. That's active in-use RAM, not just allocated by Windows. So in my particular use case, 64 was needed. But then again, I went to the high-end desktop because I do 4K video for a living. But if you're doing image editing or 1080p video editing, then 32 gigs is a really nice sweet spot for that kind of work and recommended over 16 gigs. Now that's capacity. Let's talk about brand for a minute. If you look in front of me, you'll see a whole bunch of brands. We have G.Skill, Corsair, ADATA, we've got Crucial, Giel. These are all major brand companies. So long as the speed and capacity is supported by the motherboard that you choose, they'll all work fine in your system. The choice of brand really just comes down to personal preference, aesthetic, design, and essentially price. Now, linked down below in the video description will be several links to several different speeds of RAM sorted by price lowest to highest. Go down that list, pick out the one that has the color that you like that matches your system. Pick the one if you have a brand preference by that. It really doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Now, there are several brands which are not here, which I have no personal experience with. The current price leader on Newegg often tends to be a company called Team Group out of Taiwan. Now, I have heard from other people that the Team Group brand works very well. I have no personal experience with it, so I cannot give you a thumbs up or thumbs down on that. Any brand RAM that I haven't covered, I'm not going to make a specific recommendation on simply because I haven't used it. Now, there is one brand not on the desk that I have used and I would trust, which is Kingston. Kingston makes the HyperX RAM. It works just fine. I don't have any of the current high-speed DDR4 stuff from them, but I've used them for years, DDR3. In fact, I got some DDR3 Kingston over there on the shelf. They would be fine as well. But as far as other brands like Team Group, it's probably fine. I just haven't personally used it. My personal take on that is once you get down to within a $5 or $10 price difference, it's all personal preference rather than anything else, because $5 one way or another in a system build like this shouldn't make a big difference. Putting brand aside for a minute, let's talk about speed and performance. Now, most of the kits in front of you here are DDR4 3200, but there are a couple of exceptions. This white kit right here is DDR4 4000, and this is the most expensive, fanciest RAM I have. You probably can't see it on camera unless you're watching at 4K. This is DDR4 4266, RGB Trident Z. Yes, this is expensive stuff. I bought this to test the latest current crop of the Z370 boards to see which ones would support really, really fast RAM. One did. Yeah, this is not very well supported yet. Honestly, 4000 is as fast as most of the boards go, and it does cost a little bit less. Now, one of the questions may be, how fast of a RAM do you need to buy? For your typical user just playing games, just using your computer in a normal consumer fashion, DDR4 3200 is the sweet spot of price to performance. Currently, you can find it. It's more than 150, but it's less than about 180 at the moment in December of 2017 when I'm filming this, and that's where you're going to get the best value for the money. When you go below 3200, especially on a 5 gigahertz machine, I think you start to give up some performance and it's completely unnecessary. You'll save $10, maybe $20 by going down to 2800 or 2666. But on a $2,000 machine, saving $20 on your RAM is simply not worth it. Please don't bother. DDR4 3200 is supported on all the boards that I've tested. In fact, I've installed multiple versions of each of these kits on more than 6 different motherboards that I've already set up and tested on my test bench. Every one worked perfectly. When you go above 3200, then you have to start looking at what's called the QVL, the Qualified Vendor List, which is a list of specific RAM kits by part number that are tested by the RAM companies and the motherboard manufacturers to find compatibility. This, for example, is on only one QVL, which is why I bought it to test on that board, and it does work, but it does not work at 4266 on any of the other boards. It does run at 4000 on several of them, but then again, so does this, and it costs less. Now, when you go looking for RAM, you might find DDR4 3000 for $20 or $30 less. Maybe you find a sale or deal. That's fine. I mean, that's only 200 megahertz less than 3200. You might consider doing that. But so long as the price is within maybe, say, the cost of a pizza, get the 3200. 3600 might also only be another $20 more, but for 3600, check the motherboard manufacturer's QVL to make sure it works on your specific board. It'll work on all the $200 boards and most of the 150s. As you get down in price, fewer RAM kits are generally tested on the less expensive boards. Now, having said that, is it worth spending, say, $50 more to get DDR4 4000? Under what circumstances would that make any kind of sense? For normal consumer use, just playing Battlefield 1 or Grand Theft Auto 5 or Ghost Recon Wildlands, does it make any difference? Oh, sure. 1 frame per second, 2 frames per second. There's a small, minor difference. That's not the place to put your money. Put your money into a better SSD. Put your money into a nicer graphics card. Put your money into a nicer motherboard. That's where I would stick my money. I wouldn't spend $50 more on RAM speed just for playing games and just using your computer. Now, if you're a professional content creator, if you edit videos for a living, if you render video, if you do a lot of heavy multitasking, run a lot of virtual machines where the active memory use is extreme, then faster memory can often make a difference. Whether it's worth it to you or not is a personal decision. I find the differences to be pretty minor overall because of CAS. The CL rating goes up as the RAM speed goes up. And I'm going to talk about CL in just a minute because there are differences even among the same clock speed of RAM. Because so far, we're talking about clock speed. But it's worth pointing out that the latency of the RAM increases as the clock speed increases. So unless you have a very specific need for faster RAM, I personally recommend sticking with DDR4 3200 for price to performance and maximum compatibility. Quick, big disclaimer, everything I just said applies to Intel CPUs. Ryzen is a special beast, and I've talked about that in my previous Which RAM Should You Buy video, but the short version with Ryzen is I would generally buy 2666 for anything up to about a Ryzen 7 1700. I would buy the 3200 for Ryzen 7 1700Xs, but you gotta be real picky about which RAM you buy and which motherboard because compatibility is extremely hit and miss with Ryzen. Getting 3200 even in December of 2017 is still quite challenging. I have a lot of RAM kits. I have a lot of Ryzen motherboards. It is completely hit and miss about which works in which. And I've had situations where, say, this MSI board will take the Corsair Vengeance at 3200, and then this Asus board will take the G-Skill at 3200. But if you swap the RAM kits with the same CPU, they no longer do it, or vice versa. And unfortunately, there's no easy resource you can go to say, well, if you just buy this board and this RAM kit, you're guaranteed to get it to work. I wish it worked that way. It doesn't. Ryzen's a special beast. So all of my comments here are related to the Intel chip, since we're doing an Intel build. One quick note on RGB. That is completely an aesthetic point. I mean, as much as people joke saying, well, RGB makes your stuff faster. Of course, obviously it doesn't, but it is beautiful. Let me show you a quick shot here of what the 64 gigs of Trident Z DDR4 3200 looks like in my Skylake X system. Yes, this is absolutely gorgeous stuff. Now, this is configurable via software. There's a program where you can change the color. You can cause it to either be static or strobe. There's a bunch of different modes you can run this at. Now, I leave it at the default because, frankly, it's pretty and nice, and I don't care that much. The RGB RAM is often not much more expensive than the non-RGB RAM. If you want Christmas on your desk, if you're getting an RGB cooler such as this, an RGB motherboard, RGB case fans, then knock yourself out. But of course, it doesn't make any difference in terms of performance between RGB and non-RGB RAM. Now that's clock speed. Let's talk about CL rating or CAS refresh time. Now, clock speed higher is better. 3200 is faster than 3000. 4000 is faster than 3000. That's very simple and easy to understand. But CL ratings work in reverse. It's the latency to access the RAM. CL14 is faster than CL16. Most of the DDR4 3200 MHz RAM on the market is CL16. The Flare X here and some others are CL14. Is it worth the money? For most of you, it's not. Very, very limited applications make really good use of faster RAM. It's nice, but it's mostly perception and sort of all in your head. The reality is the difference in normal day-to-day use of a computer between 14 and 16, and frankly, even 18 for that matter, is pretty minor. Now, if you're watching this and you are one of those special use cases where you're doing large, heavy memory access, you're running, say, 4 virtual machines that are actually actively doing something at the same time. You're doing a big video encode, 3D animation where tight latency and fast RAM really does make a difference, well then maybe buying faster RAM makes sense for you. But frankly, if that's really that critical, why aren't you on Skylake X? Why are you buying a 6-core system if super fast RAM makes a difference? Now maybe you don't need a lot of cores, fair enough. I mean, there's probably somebody out there who fits that bill, but that's a pretty narrow window. Simply as an example, this, which I mentioned before, is some of the fastest RAM you can buy. DDR4 4266, this is CL19, 19, 19, 39. That is incredibly tight timings, but it's very, very expensive RAM. By comparison, this DDR4 4000 RAM, which is slower than this in terms of clock speed, is 19, 21, 21, 41. So this has looser timings at a lower clock speed. For somebody who desperately needs fast RAM, this is actually quite a bit faster than this is, even though 4000 to 4266 may not seem like a big difference. Even if you ran this RAM at 4000, if your motherboard doesn't support it, by the way, the Z370 Tai Chi from ASRock is the only board this worked in at 4266. Everything else it wouldn't. If you need the tight timings, even if you clock this RAM at 4000, it's still going to be faster than this because of the timings. Now, can you lower or adjust the timings from what's printed on RAM, on any of the RAM? Yes, but generally they're sold this way for a reason, and there's very little flexibility in these timings. Consider that the RAM companies test all the RAM chips in here, by the way, are identical. They come off the same production line, and this is an important point. Most of all these RAM chips, there's a couple of exceptions, but most of this RAM is all made in the same factory. What they do is when it comes off, they run it through automated testing machines to test it. How high of a frequency does it take? What kind of refresh rate, what CAS rating can it take? The very best binned cherry chipped chips end up in the really expensive stuff. As they work down in terms of quality, they stick it into the budget RAM. So it's physically the same RAM. You could theoretically buy a basic set of RAM and overclock it. But if it was really stable at those speeds, the RAM companies would have sold it at the faster speeds because they charge so much more money for it. This RAM right here, the 4266, is up to double the cost outright, twice as much per gigabyte as the standard 3200 stuff is. So keep in mind, this isn't overclockable the way, say, your CPU is, because there's so many more model speeds and configurations of RAM than there is CPUs. So what's the too long did not read version of all this? Very simple and straightforward. If you're putting together a pure gaming system, 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 megahertz CL16 RAM is the sweet spot. That's the price to performance deal, and that's what I recommend you buy. Whether it is Corsair Vengeance LPX, which is exactly what this is, whether it's the Trident Z from G.Skill or the Ripjaws 5, which is very similar in most respects, or whether it's ADATA or Giel, the brand doesn't matter so much as that's the sweet spot, and that's what the first link is down in the video description below. Now, what you see right there is actually what I'm installing in this system. That is 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 CL16. That's also what this is right here. I have 32 gigs of it. I have to have 32 gigs, as I mentioned before, because I'm going to use this as my new live streaming machine. This is replacing my i7-8790K with the i7-8700. I need 32 gigs for live streaming. So whether you buy one kit or two, that's what I recommend. Moving the RAM aside, now we're going to have an in-depth conversation on storage, hard drives versus SSDs, SATA drives versus NVMe drives, capacity, performance, and how much do you really need. First, I want to talk about SSDs versus hard drives in general before I break it down to specifics. In 2017 going into 2018, if you are building a $2,000 top-of-the-line premium computer, there is no place for a hard drive as your boot drive. Full stop, end of discussion right there. Some type of SSD should be your boot drive, and frankly, all of your frequently used programs and even games should be on SSDs. If they're not, then I think maybe you want to take a look at what you're building, because for an i7-8700K with a GTX 1080 Ti, not only should all of your drives be SSDs that run your programs and games, but NVMe has a place as well. But we'll get to that in a minute. Now, hard drives are still useful for data and backup. If you've got a lot of family videos, family images, you want to back up your personal files, absolutely. I use lots of hard drives personally to back up my data. But at this point, hard drives are only used for backing up data. This i7-8700K is not getting a hard drive of any type when I actually do the build. Not just for the $2,000 budget at all. Now I have one here, I'll talk about it, and I'll talk about some of the others, but that's for illustration purposes only. The reason is I have a network. I have hard drives on my network that I back up my data to, and then I use for my videos and pictures. There's no need to put a physical hard drive in this machine. Now, solid-state drives are not faster than hard drives just because of sequential transfer rate. A lot of people look at the sequential transfer rate and that's all they see for performance. That's a mistake. SSDs are 50 to 100 times faster in access time, random access time, and that's what makes them so incredibly quick. For playing back a video or loading up a couple of images, there's virtually no difference in performance between a hard drive and an SSD because that's all sequential. And modern hard drives will do hundreds of megabytes per second sequential just fine. It's the random where they have absolutely no competition whatsoever because SSDs just literally are 50 to 100 times faster in that department. To put it another way, my existing i7-8700K build, the one with the Dark Rock Pro 3 on the MSI Gaming Carbon Pro, from cold boot when I press the power button to the Windows login screen, less than 10 seconds. To the Windows desktop is less than 10 seconds. It's about 8 or 9 seconds. It is that quick. With a hard drive, there's no way in the world you're doing it that fast. In fact, most machines are going to take a minute or more to boot, even on a quick hard drive. But boot up times are just one small part of the story. How quick does your web browser take to open? If you're a Steam program in Origin and Uplay all open when you open your computer, you want to open Word or Excel, you want to open several programs at once, on hard drives it's just atrocious. Full stop, there's no place for a hard drive for launching your programs in 2017, at least on this level machine. For a $500 or even $800 machine, I understand some people would make the argument for, you're on a budget. At this price point, no. Now, having said that, let me briefly discuss hard drives before we talk about the main course, which is the various SSDs. You can buy an internal or an external hard drive. You can buy a 5400, 5900, or 7200 RPM hard drive. There are all kinds of sizes going anywhere from 1 terabyte all the way up to 12 terabytes and beyond. Capacity is simply related to how much do you need, how many files do you have. That's a very personal decision. Buy what you need, maybe a little bit more. Now, in terms of price, 1 terabyte drives are currently running about $50 for internal drives, but 2 terabyte drives are about $70. That's not much more money for double the space. I honestly wouldn't buy a 1 terabyte drive unless you really don't have a lot of files. Buy a 2, it's a better value. 4 terabyte drives are running in the $90 to $100 price range. So again, buy what you need. Please note, when it comes to actual performance and speed, yes, 7200 RPM drives are faster than 5400 RPM drives. But for what you should be using a hard drive for in a premium system in 2017, it doesn't make any difference. The Western Digital Blacks are nice. These Toshibas are nice. I have several of these. These are 7200 RPM drives. They are faster than 5400 RPM drives, but not by that much. They're not even double the performance. Buy drives based upon price per terabyte, not performance at this point, because you're not running your games and programs from it. That's what SSDs are for. Now, I would like to point out that modern external USB 3 drives are plenty good for playing back video, saving your video archives, external backup used for images, personal files, etc. I use external drives for all of my backup purposes. In fact, under this desk is my 8-drive bay 64 terabyte array that I previously did a video on. That has 8 terabyte Seagate archive drives in it, and that is actually connected via USB 3 to my Skylake X system. That external enclosure actually has an external SATA port. I found it's not worth the bother. The USB 3 works just fine. USB 3 is very, very quick. Now that's enough about hard drives. Let's talk about the meat and potatoes of this, the solid-state drives. There are 2 primary types of SSDs on the market, SATA or Serial ATA drives, and then NVMe, which stands for Non-Volatile Memory Express, basically flash memory connected to the PCI Express bus. Now, NVMe drives are dramatically faster than SATA drives. Whether that matters to you or not depends upon what you're doing with your computer. But the truth is, modern NAND flash, the non-volatile flash memory in solid-state drives, is faster than the Serial ATA bus interface is, and the protocol that Serial ATA uses is frankly designed for hard drives, and so it doesn't give you everything that the flash memory is capable of. That is why NVMe drives are faster. It's the bus and the protocol, not just the connection speed. Now, if you're looking for value for the money and you want the most gigabytes per dollar spent, then SATA drives are going to be the place to go. A 500 gig SATA drive is very close in price to a 250 gig NVMe drive. Now, from a random access point of view, NVMe drives are roughly twice as fast as most SATA drives. They can be up to 5 times as fast, but for most people, they're twice as fast. The actual raw transfer rate, however, really is 5 times faster, but that doesn't matter for the average user. It's nice, but it's really the random access time and the multitasking and the higher throughput for higher queue depths that really makes a big difference. Now that's great, you say, but really what does that mean and what should you buy? Well, in my opinion, for a $2,000 system, the Samsung 960 EVO 250GB drive is just about the right price to performance for the boot drive for a system like this. It's about $120 to $130, and it provides wonderful performance compared to most of the SATA drives, even the 850 EVO, which it is double the performance of, even in light workloads. Now, please note that doesn't mean your computer is twice as fast. This means that file access is twice as fast. This means that launching your web browser is faster. Now, SATA drives are already very quick, and if you're trying to save some money somewhere, you can get a 250 gig 850 EVO for about $90. You're saving about $30, but I think $30 in a $2,000 system is frankly a pretty minor amount. Now, one possibility is you can take that amount of money plus the money you spend on a SATA drive and just buy a much bigger SATA drive. There are 1 terabyte SATA drives available in the $260 to $280 price range. A 1 terabyte NVMe drive is going to run you closer to $400 to $450. So as the drives go up in size, the price spread between SATA and NVMe grows. $250 is the current sweet spot, with $500 as a maybe. The 1 terabytes are expensive. In the $2,000 budget for this machine, I have 2 drives budgeted. I have that drive, 250 gigabytes for the boot drive, and then I have a 500 gig 850 EVO for loading games and other programs. It is worth noting that the price of that drive and the price of that drive is really close to the price of the 1 terabyte 850 EVO. So essentially you're getting 750 gigs, with 250 of it being really fast, and then the rest of it for your games, versus just a 1 terabyte 850 EVO and just putting everything on it. That's also a reasonable solution, and if you ultimately want more space for your money, go that route. My current streaming computer, my i7-8700K, has a 1 terabyte 850 EVO as a boot drive. That's what it boots from, that's what most of the programs and games are installed in. But I'm going this route because for an 8700K, I really think that's worth considering. It is faster, it's noticeable if you're looking for it. It is not nearly as dramatic as the jump from hard drives to SSDs. And if you're looking for a place to save money in this build, don't feel too bad about dropping it and just going with a SATA SSD. And here you can see many different models of NVMe drives. Now, I've previously done a which NVMe should you buy, so I'm not going to rehash that whole video here. It's on my channel if you want to go watch it. But let me just say that in general, if price is equal, the 960 EVO is the drive most people should buy. Now, the Pro has its own niche. There is a benefit to it for professional users, but most people should not bother and should just buy the 960 EVO. What about the other drives that you see here? I've reviewed most of these. This Kingston is new. This Kingston, by the way, is actually going onto my test bed back there to replace the Intel 600p. The Intel 600p is nice, but that Kingston is quite a bit faster. Thank you to Kingston for sending that to me. I will review that when I review the test bed back there. As for the ADATA drives, ADATA makes a variety of different models. Some of these are less expensive than the Samsung. If you find one of these for less expensive, if you can find one of these for $20 or $30 less, maybe splitting the price between SATA and NVMe, they're worth picking up. I have the SX8000 in my Ryzen 7 1700. I did giveaways with the other 2 drives as well. They're very nice, they work great, they're faster than SATA drives. They are, respectfully ADATA, I love you, not quite as fast as this is. So if the price is equal, buy the Samsung. If these are cheaper, they're worth considering as a middle ground between SATA and the NVMe. If you look, you'll also see there's a Western Digital Black. That drive is in my Skylake X system, and I use that for video render and video capture. In fact, the video that I'm capturing right now as I speak to you is not being captured on my camera. There's an HDMI cable that runs out of it into an AVIO 4K capture box that's going into my computer. OBS is capturing this video as I speak into that Western Digital Black right now in my Skylake X system. It's a very nice drive. If you want a larger drive, a 500 gig drive, I'd like to point out that that Western Digital Black and most of the 500 gig drives from the other companies are about $50 less than a 960 EVO 500 gig. So it's a very nice middle of the ground option that provides almost as fast performance for about $50 less. Moving aside all the NVMe drives, let's talk about SATA drives. Now the reality is in 2017, the performance of the NAND flash memory within these drives has now exceeded the performance of the serial ATA interface. In real-world terms, there is almost no perceptible performance difference between any of the modern good drives. There are 6 drives in front of you. I highly recommend them all. Buy based upon personal preference in terms of brand and price. You have the Samsung 850 EVO, the Crucial MX300, the ADATA SU800, the ADATA SU900, the SanDisk Ultra 2, and the Western Digital Blue, which, by the way, are almost the same drive since Western Digital bought SanDisk, took the Ultra 2, and mostly turned it into the Blue. Now, these drives do vary in several different regards, but from a day-to-day user experience, they are basically interchangeable. I use a lot of very high-end equipment. I've used all these drives and builds at various points. I've got several of them installed on this machine and my current streaming machine downstairs. I would be very hard-pressed, if not find it to be completely impossible, to pick out which drive was which in a blind test. They really are that close in performance. The NVMe's still have some performance differences, but the SATA drives, at least the modern good ones, are virtually identical. Now, about 2 months ago, I did a video on my channel, which solid-state drive to buy, not the NVMe version, but the SATA version. I ended up with 10 drives on the desk. There were a few others that aren't here, the Kingston drives, for example, which I still recommend. I use them. In fact, the 2 Kingston 480 gig drives in that video are in my test bench back there, and I use them all the time whenever I'm doing my benchmarking and testing on the test bench. They're very good drives, so I do, in fact, use them. They're just not here to keep the number of suggestions and drives down, but I will cover those again when I review the test bench. Now, I mentioned that there were some minor differences with these drives. Let me talk about those. The ADATA drives provide a great opportunity to provide the difference between TLC and MLC. For 99% of you watching this video, this next topic is completely unimportant and you can completely forget about it. It will never make a difference to you. But the reality is most of these drives, such as the SU800, as well as these, you use what's called TLC or tri-level cell. Each NAND memory cell actually stores 3 bits of information. The Samsung 850 Pro, not the EVO, and the ADATA SU900 are MLC drives. They store 2 bits per cell. That, by the way, is also the difference between the EVO and the Pro on the 960 NVMe drives. The 960 Pro is MLC, whereas the 960 EVO is TLC, but that's a separate conversation. Now, the reality is the 850 Pro and the SU900 have better write endurance and better sustained drive writes than the TLC drives do. The way the TLC drives work is they have a small SLC or single level cell cache. You write 1 gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, 10 gigabytes to them. No worries, these drives are 500 megabytes per second, lickety split fast, great. If you try to do a full drive write continuous without interruption to the TLC drives, they will start slowing down after a certain percentage of the drive is written. And that is because the TLC's write speed is not 500 megabytes per second. The 850 EVO, the SU800 cannot maintain 500 megabytes per second for a full continuous full drive write. How many of you are ever going to do that, actually write the entire length of the drive? Less than 1% of you, probably less than 1/10% of you are ever going to do it. So it's not important. The MLC drives can maintain full write speed for the whole drive. They don't have to have a cache and a buffer because the MLC is so much faster than TLC. The other benefit to MLC drives versus TLC drives, same with the Pro and EVO, same with these two, is that the MLC drives have more write endurance. You can write more total terabytes before the NAND cells physically start to fail. Yes, that's right, SSDs do in fact have a finite life. Not to worry, we'll talk about that in a minute. It's not an issue for 99.9% of you, but the reality is, if you start to write terabyte after terabyte after terabyte to these two drives, the SU800 will fail before the SU900 does because of the write endurance. This does not matter to virtually any normal user. This is only people who either deliberately abuse the drive or use it in professional work environments or for databases or multi-user environments where the drive basically is written to continuously. Outside of that, you will outgrow these drives before you out-endurance them. Now, let me be abundantly clear. Day-to-day normal user tasks, you will not notice a performance difference between the Evo and the Pro and the 800 and 900 series of drives. TLC versus MLC is not an important factor for the vast majority of you. Buy the less expensive drive. It is absolutely fine. Yes, I have a 960 Pro in my Skylake X system. That's a $4,000 professional build that I do heavy work with every day. That's not normal user experience. I have an 850 Evo drive in my streaming PC. I'm putting a 960 Evo drive in my normal streaming PC. You don't need a Pro drive. You don't need a 900 for that type of workload. In the early days of SSDs, drive endurance was a concern. A lot of people were very nervous about using SSDs. Think, wait a minute, the NAND has a finite life? You mean it'll just fail on me at some point? Oh, I don't want to go with that. Hard drives last forever. Well, first of all, no, they don't. Hard drives have a horrendously bad fail rate. On average, if you buy 100 hard drives, in the first year, 1 or 2 of them is likely to fail. By year 3, you're likely to have 4 to 5 failures. Yes, you'll see a 3 to 5% failure rate in the first 3 years per 100 hard drives that you actually install. The reliability of solid-state drives is far superior to hard drives. Now on to endurance. These 4 Intel drives are some, but not all, of my oldest SSDs that I have. I am going to start with this one right here. This is a 40 gigabyte X25-V Intel drive from 2010. Yes, it still works fine, but it is a little on the slow side. I actually got this as a promotion for the X25G2 160 gig drive that I bought back in 2010 from Newegg. Thank you for having that promotion. This was nice. That 160 gig drive I can't show you. It's physically installed on that machine right there, which is my Core 2 Quad. Still works great. These drives are 7+ years old at this point. Now, this hasn't seen daily use in a while, but it did for the first couple of years, and that did for the first couple of years as well, although it doesn't really anymore. But these drives still work fine, and they have plenty of write endurance left. Moving on from there, these other drives are 120 and 180 gig, either 320 or 330 series Intel drives, and they also work just fine, although they are much slower than the current modern drives. But let's deal with something a little bit more recent than those, the Samsung 840 and the Samsung 840 Evo. Yes, there was a non-Evo, non-Pro 840. The Samsung 840 is currently installed and has been since day one in my i7-2600K. It was an i5-2500K. I upgraded that earlier this year, but that actual machine, that motherboard, that install of Windows, everything there is original, dating back to 2011. My 840 Evo is installed in my i7-4770K from 2013. That machine is still active and in current use, and I have used it heavily. In fact, there is over 100 terabytes written to both of those drives. Both of those drives still have about 90% of their drive life left. Yes, you heard me right. Those drives are between 4 to 6 years old. They were daily active machines for about 3 years each for me personally, using them, installing them, running games from them, running programs from them. And they've had 100+ terabytes written to them. In fact, the 840 Evo has had nearly 170 terabytes written to it, and it's got about 90% of its drive life left. That drive will long since be too small and too slow to be useful before I could ever possibly use it up. Now, all of these drives come with something called a spare area or spare sectors. When NAND cells start to fail, they start to reallocate the sectors internally, and you can use tools like Crystal Disk Info to actually see whether or not any sectors have been reallocated. None of my drives have. In fact, even these really old Intel drives still haven't. The endurance is much further than you think it is. Even if you buy a 1 terabyte drive and use it heavy, active, and daily, you're going to go a decade before it's remotely an issue. Now, there are companies, there are websites and testers that have tested these to destruction. If you write to them 24/7, yes, you will burn the drives out and destroy them, partly from heat from being written quite that much. They aren't really meant to be written 24/7. Well, the MLC and the Pro drives are, but the Evos aren't. However, even then, even with 24/7 write cycles put to the ridiculous torture test that is completely unreasonable and unrealistic, several of the drives lasted for 18+ months under an insane torture test before failing. So if you are all worried about endurance, please don't be. I was, sure, back in 2010, 2011, I was like, well, I don't want to write too much to my drive and wear it out. No, that's not, I don't even think about it today. I just use my drive and don't remotely care about that. It is not a factor. A few more points. If you did buy an SSD 5 years ago and you're planning on building a new 8700K, don't move the old drive over to this. It's not an endurance issue, it's a performance issue. These older Intel drives are a third or less of the performance of the modern drives. It is actually noticeable. They are quite a bit slower. In fact, in terms of transfer speed, some of these SSDs are slower than hard drives. Not random, they're still better for random, but they actually transfer slower than some modern hard drives do. So frankly, that's why they're sitting on my desk. It's time to retire them. I'm going to briefly cover some SSDs which weren't in my SSD review video and which I haven't talked about so far. A fairly new one is the SU700 from ADATA. It's going to be slower than the 800, of course. If you find a good deal on this, if you're looking for a drive just to throw some of your maybe lesser played games, or you're on a tighter budget, or you just want an extra SSD, the SU700 is fine. It's not going to be quite as fast as the others, but it's monstrously faster than a hard drive. This is one of those situations where price per gigabyte rules all. If it's $20 less and you don't mind maybe a slight performance deficit versus the SU800, get the 700. The Munchkin reactor drives are an interesting thing. The reactors are actually MLC drives. The triactors are the TLC drives. This is actually an MLC drive. It is not a performance drive, but it's fast enough. It's not as quick as an 850 EVO is, but it's within the ballpark of performance. You can sometimes find these over on Newegg for a really, really good price. If you do, sure, there's nothing wrong with them. I've got one of these installed in a system downstairs. It works, it's reliable. It's not flashy, but it does the job. This is not an MX300. You can notice the slight difference here with the label. This is a BX300, the new drive that Crucial just came out with in the fall of 2017. I have the retail box somewhere. I can't find it. Crucial did send this to me, by the way. They didn't send me the 300s, but they did send me this, so thank you, Crucial, to review. I will do a separate review of this when I do the test bench reviews, because I'll put it on there, and I'll do a couple of the newer drives which weren't in my original SSD review. This is a nice drive. It's fine. It's not as fast as the MX300. The MX300 is the performance drive, but it's pretty close. If this is less expensive, the BX300, then by all means get one. If it's the price and the size that you want, it's just fine. Please note that the BX300 is a dramatic improvement over the older BX200, which was pretty slow. So nice drive if the price is right for you. I do not give a not recommended very often. Silicon Power S55, not recommended under any reason whatsoever. This can't be cheap enough to be worth the bother. I have a couple of these because I picked them up way cheap last year. Don't laugh, 120 gig drive, these were under $30 in 2016. I found out why. They're dreadfully slow. These are like worse than some 5-year-old drives. Please don't buy the Silicon Power S550s. Now, I have one of these downstairs on one of my Acer pre-built machines because it came with a hard drive, and I thought, oh, 120 gig, it's enough, I'll stick it in there. Running Windows Update on that almost feels like a hard drive, so don't buy the Silicon Power drives. They're terrible. This is a Transcend 370S. I have two of these in two different pre-builts downstairs. It works fine. It's an older drive. If you have one, it's okay. I'm actually going to replace those at some point because they are in fact slower than the current modern drives that I showed you. I mean, if you found one of these for like way less expensive than the others, it'd be fine. But I didn't cover this in my Which SSD Should You review simply for that reason. I wouldn't buy one because generally the price isn't cheap enough to justify the reduced performance. Yes, AMD does sell SSDs. Well, kind of, sort of. They're just rebrands. They don't really make SSDs themselves. AMD did briefly flirt with making Radeon branded SSDs. Yeah, this is nothing to write home about, and there's a reason why it kind of sort of came and went without much fanfare in the industry. I guess at a cheap enough price, it's fine. I benchmarked and tested it, but yeah, it's nothing exciting. Skip this unless it's just really cheap. Toshiba OCZ. I have a love-hate relationship with OCZ, and frankly, the history of the early launch of SSDs and OCZ is honestly a video in and of itself. This drive is fine. The newer OCZs are really Toshiba drives. Toshiba bought OCZ out of bankruptcy. If you find one cheap, they're fine. With all the other excellent drives available on the market, I wouldn't bother. If it's $5 or $10 less, it might be tempting. You might think, well, I'll save a few dollars. Don't. Buy one of the ones I've already talked about. It's worth $5 or $10 more. Do not adjust your set. This is not an 850 EVO. This is a 750 EVO, which came out after the 850 EVO. Yeah, I know, confusing. This kind of came and went without a lot of fanfare. I suspect that the 750 EVO was originally meant for budget markets, maybe overseas markets. They thought it'd be an OEM drive. It saw some traction. I bought a couple of them. I've used them. It is slower than an 850 EVO. And the price was never cheap enough to justify bothering. Again, you're saving $5 or $10, but you're giving up 25% of your performance. Don't bother. In fact, these are largely not available, at least in the US anymore, so it doesn't matter. But if you see a 750 EVO, yeah, get an 850 EVO. I mentioned that the SanDisk Ultra 2 was awesome. It is. This is not. This is a SanDisk SSD Plus, and it's slow. Very slow. Noticeably slow. SanDisk, Western Digital, I love you. Those drives are great. This drive's awesome. Don't buy one. Corsair has dabbled in making solid-state drives. This is their Force LE. It's fine. It's better than some of the others I've said not recommended to. It's not as fast as the ones I did recommend. I don't even know if this is in production anymore, but I have one. It's installed on a machine downstairs. I have a lot of computers. What can I say? I wouldn't bother. I would skip it. Now, they do make some NVMe drives. I've asked them for one. They haven't sent me one. If they do, I'll review it. Maybe their newer drives are better, but this was kind of a meh. It's okay, not terrible, but not great, which is probably why you don't hear much about it. This is a new company that I have never reviewed before, and in fact, it's in the retail box, and I have not yet reviewed it. I will cover this. In fact, you can see the 500 gig version right there. They sent me 3 drives. I'll be doing a giveaway on this pretty soon. They sent me 3 drives to review, and I will give that a separate video where I test 120, 240, and 512 on the size. This is currently $5 less than the Ultra 2 is on Amazon. That's $80 for a 250 gig. This is $75. Is it worth saving $5? Well, I honestly don't know yet because I haven't tested it. Personally, I wouldn't. My advice to you and to them is that if you're new and up and coming and you're trying to sell SSDs and you're trying to compete with the likes of them, you got to make your price better than that. If you just want a cheap drive, it might be worth considering. I'll let you know more once I review it. Last but not least, because I don't have a box for it, so I pulled it from here, this is the SanDisk Z400. They make a 400 and a 400S. Actually, that is an S. These are largely OEM drives. They're fine. I wouldn't bother. I mean, if you find one super cheap, they're certainly okay, but the Ultra 2 would be a better choice. I just mention it because I have one, and, well, I have one. Now, I realize that is a ton of information to provide, but that's why I broke the Y-Vlog up into segments. I would not have provided nearly this much information if I'd put the entire build video Y-Vlog into one video. So hopefully you guys found this interesting. But before we go, let me give you the 30,000-foot too long did not read version, which maybe should have been at the beginning of the video, but hey, this is your reward for sticking around. 95+% of you thinking of building anything remotely close to the system that I'm showing you. 16 gigs DDR4 3200 megahertz CL16 is what you should buy. That's the deal. That's the price to performance. That's what the CPU wants. Anything above or below that kind of deviates from the value. The remaining 5% of you should put in 32 gigs. Live streamers and people who are dual tasking between gaming and content creation, put in 32 gigs of RAM. Full stop. Now, for solid state drives, I do think at the $2,000 price point, the Samsung 960 EVO makes sense. 250 gigs for most of you, or stretch it to 500 if you want a bigger drive. It's more money, 250, but fair enough. Or you could just put in a 1 terabyte SATA SSD if you simply want one large drive. That's also reasonable and fine. I highly recommend you pick from the 6 drives that I showed you up front. The 850 EVO, the MX300, the SU800, the SU900, the Western Digital Blue, or the SanDisk Ultra 2. Great, awesome drives. They're all within $5 or $10 of each other in terms of price. You'll be happy with any of them. Now, in terms of hard drives, that's simply personal preference. How much storage you need for your videos, your backups, your files, your downloads, your non-application programs, that's simply add what you need. I hope this video was helpful and useful to you. Like this video if you like it. Share it with all your friends if you loved it. Remember to subscribe with that big red button down below. Please leave your comments down in the comment section. Let me know what you thought. Leave your questions for tomorrow's video, which will be the rest of this machine. And then finally, please remember to use the links in the video description. They are affiliate links. They support the channel. They're a great way to help me out so I can keep making great videos for you like this. Some of these companies do send me stuff, but not all of them. Every single Samsung drive you've seen on my channel, for example, I paid for. Samsung's not sampled me anything. I've bought some of the crucials, they've sampled others, and so on. So I use your help to fill in the gaps with what companies send to try to provide you the best overall reviews that hopefully help you out. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in my next very long live vlog.